This is Cotswold District Council Live. Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Cotswold District Council Live. I'm Councillor Joe Harris, your presenter today and leader of Cotswold District Council. We've got a packed show today. We're joined by lots of guests taking advantage of the flexibility in the lockdown rules. We are joined by Councillor Lisa Spivey, who is Cabinet Member for Housing and Homelessness here in the Cotswolds. We are joined by Maureen Marjorie. Did I say that right, Maureen? My apologies.
Marjorie.
Marjorie, there we go. Chief Executive of Cirencester Housing. A bit later in the show, we're also going to be joined by Councillor Andrew Doherty for the bin update. He's our Cabinet Member for Waste and Recycling. And we're also joined by Daisy Payne from Garden to Garnish, and she's a blogger. Looking forward to that. As is customary, I want to say a big thank you to the Barn Theatre for hosting us here today. And of course, a massive, massive thank you to everybody who's still continuing to ensure that the NHS functions, all doctors, nurses and everybody associated with the NHS. A massive thank you to all of you for your efforts over the last few months and certainly recently. And a big shout out as well to all key workers, including our own council staff. We'll be hearing from Andy, in particular about the waste service a bit later on. We know they've been working above and beyond. And finally, a big thank you to our residents here in the Cotswolds. As the lockdown has eased, I know many places in the Cotswolds have become very, very busy. I visited Bourton-on-the-Water and Bybury, two examples, and they've been absolutely heaving. And despite best intentions, social distancing hasn't always been followed. But residents have remained calm and they've remained vigilant and they've tried to get through it. So a big thank you to all of our residents and businesses for everything that you're doing to help get the local economy restarted and to ensure that visitors and residents remain safe from harm. So, a few announcements before we get on to our first topic of the day. We've had a really successful launch of the business packs. As businesses have begun to open, we've been sending business packs to many local businesses. I know a lot of businesses have found these really, really helpful and have lots of positive feedback on that. The absolutely key aim is to ensure that people are confident using our shops, and as the hospitality sector begins to open, people feel confident visiting pubs, restaurants, hotels, etc. We've had new guidance today, which on the 4th of July means that pubs, hospitality sector will be throwing open their doors. So we're pleased to hear that, but let's make sure that we're doing it properly. We're going to be therefore putting together another pack, particularly for the hospitality trade, so they can ensure that they're following all the rules they can and they've got the resources they need to help keep the public informed. If you are a business and you're interested in a pack, email hi.streets@cotswold.gov.uk and we will get a pack to you. So, let's crack on with business today. We are talking about housing and homelessness. And as I mentioned, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Councillor Lisa Spivey. Lisa, it's been a really, really busy time for both of us. No rest for the wicked, they say.
Indeed.
What has the council been doing on housing and homelessness? Because clearly government gave us resource to make sure that we can house as many people as possible, and that's been quite successful.
Yes, it has, and I have to say that sort of everyone in message was a real clarion call to literally get everyone in off the street so that those most vulnerable would be safe from this pandemic, or as safe as they could be. And that meant that those that would not normally have recourse to public funding, etc., in order to provide accommodation, we were given that authority to do that. And local authorities across the country did an amazing job in the first few days of lockdown, literally getting everyone in, and that's been really, really successful. We've worked with Cotswold District Council with other councils as part of the county group, and we block booked some accommodation and got our most vulnerable street sleeping homeless people into accommodation almost straight away, which has been fantastic. The team locally at Cotswold District Council have also been individually working incredibly hard. They've done really amazing things. They've managed to secure other accommodation here in Cirencester to help those who need emergency or temporary accommodation. They have gone out to their own contacts and got food. They've got furniture. They've got all sorts of things. So they've been working really, really hard and doing a brilliant job, supported by our residents here in the Cotswolds.
Fantastic. So we've got lots of people off the street and into housing. How do we ensure that we make sure that they stay in housing? Because what we don't want is lockdown to be lifted and suddenly we go back to a situation that we were in before.
That's right, exactly, and that is always the risk. I mean, obviously there is some there's pressure on government to help us to do that, but via funding. But what we're also doing in the Cotswolds is we've kind of grasped the nettle, and I'm really, really pleased to say that what we've done is we've allocated £60,000 to trial a Housing First scheme, which really works intensively with those most entrenched rough sleepers who have highly complex needs and for whom the traditional route from street to a safe and secure home doesn't always work.
So give us an example of that. So let's say Brian's on the street. What happens then?
Well,
somebody
normally
reports that he's homeless.
Yeah.
What would happen?
So what would normally happen to Brian in the street is that we would expect him to, there were people who would work with him, but what would happen is he would be expected at some point to become tenancy ready and have to prove that. So any problems that he might have, let's say whether they were to do with drug or alcohol dependency, perhaps mental health issues, physical health issues as well, then we would work with him, but we would expect him to come in and to prove over a certain period of time that he was ready to take on a full-time tenancy. Housing First flips that completely, and we say, don't worry, we'll put you in a home and we will work with you intensively in that place. It's safe. You will not have to deal with all the rules, but for many people who've been on the streets for a long time, having a home is a huge responsibility and it's actually quite frightening. So we work really, really intensively. It's a really great scheme, and it's been it first came out in America. It's been trialled across Europe and had some great results.
Yeah. I think we can all identify with that, can't we? Having a home is a responsibility, yeah. And for many of us, that've got very stable lives, it can still be quite difficult keeping on top of it, can't it? So for somebody that's perhaps been on the street, had a bit of a chaotic life, that could be particularly difficult. So that's fantastic news. Yeah. So residents might walk through Cirencester, and certainly I've noticed, or anywhere in the Cotswolds, and I've noticed a homeless chap on the street, or appeared homeless.
Yeah.
Why are there still people on the street then, if we've been told to house everybody?
Yes, no, we do hear of that, and I similarly know of that. We do see some people, but you have to understand and appreciate that for some people this is their life. It's what they've known. It's what they've always known. So I can absolutely guarantee that everybody has been offered accommodation, and the vast majority of them have gone into the accommodation and stayed there, and that's been really brilliant. As the lockdown has eased, there has been a bit more of a return of some people who we see again on the streets, perhaps begging, but I can assure all residents and yourself that they have been offered accommodation, they have accommodation, and if they really, really are not refusing to go into the accommodation, we have outreach workers who will go to them and help them and support them in every way they can.
It sounds like that Housing First model will really help support that. I want to talk about then sort of affordable housing and housing delivery. Residents at home will have heard me talking many times about needing to deliver more social rented housing in particular. We've seen thousands of homes built across the Cotswolds over the last 10 years or so, in some cases quite chaotically, but actually many of the needs still aren't being met. Quite simply, we've left it to the market to deliver housing, and the market hasn't delivered the type of housing that we need, social rented housing, on an affordable basis. And the administration that I've led, the District Council, are now committed to delivering housing once again. And we've got some fantastic smaller social housing providers in the Cotswolds. And as I mentioned, we're joined by Maureen today, and we'll get into the skin of that a bit. But Lisa, can you just sort of, before we sort of talk to Maureen, can you just sort of talk to us about what our plans are for housing in the Cotswolds? Because we've got some quite exciting plans, some little steps, but hopefully it will lead to something bigger.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think what we really want to do is target those most in need, and I think actually this pandemic will show us, as we come into the autumn, perhaps those people who've maybe managed now but might lose jobs, etc. So I unfortunately think we will see a rise in those needing housing, and that's where, you know, we've really got to do everything we can to help that, and that will be a variety of methods really. It's be working in partnership with established housing associations to bring forward as much social rented accommodation as we can via those usual methods. But I think for us as a council to be ambitious, at the moment we're looking through every single plot and parcel of land that we own as a district council to see what we can do with that, whether there's something that we can actively do. We're always looking for landowners, people to work in partnership with. It's a really important aspect of life in the Cotswolds. What we don't want to be doing is making ourselves a playground only for rich people. And we have many local people doing really important jobs. Our key workers, who you mentioned earlier, they need somewhere to live. So along with our climate emergency, what we don't want to do is see people having to drive in from other counties, other districts in order to work here in the Cotswolds. We want to see local people working and living and thriving here. It makes for better communities. So I think we'll be working with in a number of ways to try and achieve that.
So Maureen, over to you now. Maureen, do you want to just sort of introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself and Cirencester Housing, and yeah, just be good to understand that.
Well, I've been with Cirencester Housing now for 5 years, and before that I worked for a homeless charity, Emmaus, and so I can very much relate to what Lisa was speaking about earlier, and very excited about the Housing First program. At Cirencester Housing, they've been around for 70 years. They started in the 1950s when there was much needed housing in Cirencester town, and all the government funding was going to larger urban areas for developing of housing. So some very like-minded people got together and said, we need to build some social housing in Cirencester to deal with the demand of low-cost housing. So we did that, and we've been around since then. We've got some stock through the years, through a couple of small transitions. But in early 2000s, it became clear that as a very small housing association, and we are very small in the world of housing. How many houses we have? We have 153 homes. Okay. So that is very small in the world of housing. But we're very concentrated, and we like to look and do what other large housing associations won't do. And one of the things that we noticed as we came into the 2000s and around later 2000s, there's not enough building happening in rural and village locations, because it is very costly in the Cotswolds to develop in rural and village locations for many of the reasons that we were talking about. And we do actually have an estate in Bybury that we did.
Yeah, so talk to us about some of the schemes that sort of people might be familiar with, because obviously the Bybury one's been there for a little while now.
Yeah, Bybury was built in 2015, 11 homes, affordable rent homes, all of them. And for those who don't understand the difference between affordable rent and social rent, affordable rent is pegged at a percentage of the market rent, where social rent is based upon a formula that is dictated by the government. Social rent is lower rent in the Cotswolds than it is affordable rent.
Yeah, and if I can just, Maureen, I think the thing that's really got, really stuck with me and annoyed me over the last, since I've been a councillor, is we hear, in particular on big developments, them lauding all the affordable housing that they're delivering, but 80% of market rate in the Cotswolds isn't affordable, is it?
It can be darn hard.
It's absolutely bonkers, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
so I think, yeah, the distinction there is really key.
It's
Social
very
rent
key.
is what what we need to build,
Yeah.
the type of housing we need.
And it is what we need to build. It is not what the government has been pushing for the last 15 years.
Sure does.
So it is time for, and it's great to hear local authorities taking up that call, knowing that they need to deliver social rent and more lower rent accommodation for their residents and their communities, for their communities to survive. So very, very heartened to hear that. So we did the Byberry scheme, that was on a rural exception site, and those are really exciting sites to do because those are always come through a community gathering around saying we want some affordable housing in our community. We know we have a local need for housing. And the most recent one that we're delivering is in North Cerny. And again, this was a project that the local community, it started with the parish councillor and people going to the councils there to say that we need affordable housing. And that started in 2013, and here we are in 2020, and we're finally going to get the keys handed over it in a couple of weeks, in July. So we are very excited about that. 2 of the homes that we will have will be affordable shared ownership. And that means that the people that buy the homes will be buying 40% of the value of the home, will retain the rest of it, the value. And it's a very good low-cost way to get on the housing ladder, because you get a mortgage or you borrow money for your initial purchase, and then you pay us a small rent for the part that you don't own. In comparable to if you were buying the whole home and paying a mortgage on the whole price, you're reducing your mortgage by about 20 or 30%. So it does make getting into that home ownership quite affordable.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So Lisa, obviously we were, so I visited a year ago when it was sort of ground zero, if you like. It was just, work was just starting to begin, and I know you've been and visited at various points. Really exciting scheme and something we want to be seeing a lot more of.
Yeah, fantastic. It's exactly this kind of scheme that we would really, really like to encourage and see much more of across the Cotswolds. It's what makes the Cotswolds great, I think. It's what people like. They like the fact that we're small communities where people know each other. Perhaps they've lived there for their grandparents, parents. They can stay local. They can work local. And I think as well, rather than just everybody sort of having to be forced to go to the bigger towns, it's really, really important that we see the continuation of our villages. And again, as part of, I think, the fallout of COVID and some of the silver linings we see is that people want to be more at home. They've really, many of them who are lucky to have nice homes have enjoyed that and understand that they don't want to be travelling far and wide.
What role do you see Maureen's organisation, Cirencester Housing, playing, and smaller providers? You know, we've got some good little providers up and down the Cotswolds. Obviously, I think Cirencester Housing, you sort of cater for the South Cotswolds, don't you?
Yeah.
Site in Byberry, North Cerny, and we've got other providers that we know work really hard. What role do you see?
I see them as being absolutely key, and I think it's about a partnership. You know, if we can find some small sites or landowners come forward or communities come forward, as Maureen said, then we can facilitate that. We have a really great team at Cotswold District Council. We've got enablers there who will support communities in bringing this forward, and we would very much like to be working on many schemes with Maureen. I think they're doing a really great job, and what is really fantastic is the quality of the housing. So what we're not seeing there is just something which has been kind of thrown out as a big development. These are really, really well thought out homes which are fit for the future. They're really, really great places to live.
Fantastic. We've got I've got a photo here of some of the site in North Cerny. There's been a bit of press coverage. Have you had lots of sort of interest in that site? How, if somebody was interested, maybe they had a local link, to the area, how would they go about?
The best way to go about it is to contact us directly. And our website and our email address are very easy. It's cirencesterhousing, all one word, .org.uk. And because we are advertising right now on home seekers for the rented properties, And we have not allocated all the rented properties. We do still have a couple of 2-bedroom houses and a couple of flats, 1-bedroom flats available. And I'll tell you, I stopped by the site on my way into Cirencester this morning, just because I do, and it was a lovely morning today. And I am so thrilled with the quality of these homes and the size of the, the rooms and just the feel of these houses. These are really nice houses, and we desperately need local people, local North Cerny and Badgerton Parish people to come and apply for these homes.
Fantastic.
So that's the best way to do it, is contact us directly. Or you could contact your ward councillor, and she will put you in touch with us.
Yeah,
that's right.
Jenny Ford is the local councillor. She's appeared on this show a few times. She's been very busy, but she'd be absolutely delighted to hear from people, and then she can put them in touch.
Yeah.
Well, Maureen, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much for joining us. And I just want to say, I think, on behalf of the council, going back many years, it hasn't been good enough in terms of housing delivery. We've seen many thousands of homes built over the last decade or so, and I think it's fair to say that they have totally failed to deliver the type of affordable housing that we need here in the Cotswolds. We have an absolutely raging housing crisis, and we have to start doing something about it now. The market has failed to deliver the type of housing that we need. And we might not solve the problem, but certainly you have it from me and from Lisa that we're going to do everything that we can to help make a dent into that housing crisis. And just think, if every council across the UK did this, then we'd be in a much better position. But we've got to get the local authorities building houses again, and we're going to start doing that here in the Cotswolds. Lisa and Maureen, thank you very much. We're going to move on now to talk about composting and garden waste, everybody's favourite subject, and I have to say by far the issue I get the most correspondence about whenever we do a feature on it. If you've got questions, either about housing that we've just heard about, or indeed about what you're about to hear on composting, garden waste, please comment on Facebook, on YouTube. That will appear on my screen, and we will try and answer as many questions as we can towards the end of the broadcast. You may remember we had a vlogger called Daisy Payne, whose account Garden to Garnish features what she's been doing on her allotment in her garden and showcases what you can get up to at home. She's an absolute star in that she got a home composter after the garden waste service was suspended, and it's run and run and run. So let's watch the tape, and then we will hear from Daisy and Andy.
I'm Daisy from Garden to Garnish on Instagram, and since the start of lockdown I've started home composting. Getting a home compost bin has been brilliant because things that would ordinarily go in the green bin can be composted, and things such as eggshells, some tea bags, cardboard and paper, they can all go in. There's really nothing to it. You just load it all up, rip it up if you want to, and away you go. And all of this will break down and be ready as really nutritious compost next year, which will be perfect for mulching the borders. Now that our lovely town of Cirencester is opening back up, if you grab a coffee in town and your cup is compostable, you can of course bring it home and put it in your home compost bin. I am going to cut these up now and put them in. The great thing is all the materials inside really sink down over time, even just after a week or so, and they really reduce, so there's always more space to add in your grass cuttings or the plants that you're pruning. You can just pop them all in and it will start to break down. Good luck with your home composting. I really would urge you to give it a go. It's amazing for the environment. It really does reduce your carbon footprint, and not only that, it just massively reduces the waste that you're popping in your bins and your recycling. So it is really worth giving a go. Good luck.
Fantastic as always, Daisy, and high production quality of those videos. I know Ben, your partner, has been working very hard on those, so fantastic. So Daisy, this is the first time you've joined us in the studio. Welcome. We're also joined by Andy Doherty, who is a regular fixture now of this. You've heard from him many times about garden waste. So Daisy, you're a vlogger. For people that are watching that have absolutely no idea what a vlogger is, can you explain and give us a bit of a flavour about what you do on social media?
Good question, Joe. I do have a job. I work for a living. On the side, I love gardening. And at the start of lockdown, I felt obliged to kind of get more people into it. So just started sharing some content on the Instagram, as my parents call it, and on YouTube, just to try and inspire people to maybe get outside and to do some stuff in their garden that they maybe wouldn't normally have done. And it's kind of taken off, really. Big shout out to Daisy May Cooper, who kind of got behind it a little bit as well, which helped massively. But I think it came at a really timely point in lockdown when people were sort of wondering what on earth to do next. So yeah, and to my shame, before lockdown I didn't own a compost bin. Very sorry, Andy.
Well, you own one now. That's the main thing. So you've been composting. You've been busy composting. Like, how have you found it?
I do. I feel ashamed that I didn't own one before.
So, sorry, Daisy. So you used to own like a normal garden waste bin, like every
yes.
year? Yep.
So I have a garden waste bin that I pay my extra bit for every year, and used to fill it right up every week, and sometimes have to get in it and jump to push it down, and so yeah, when the waste service was paused, that was a sort of nudge I needed really to order the compost bin. And I haven't needed my green waste bin since.
Fantastic, that's amazing. Andy, we know that you're a big advocate of composting, and as things change, as the world changes, we need to be less reliant on the garden waste service. Am I right? And composting is a good way that we can make that happen.
Definitely right. I mean, there's lots of useful things actually for Daisy to maybe talk about a little bit more in terms of the things she's done with the compost bin. But the basic premise is simple. Driving lots of big lorries around full of grass clippings is not an environmentally sound way of doing things. I think that's one of the kind of odd things. I have lots of conversations with people around, and people are often surprised about how much fuel a lorry burns moving around. But it's a big, heavy object, driving hundreds of thousand miles around the Cotswolds every year. So if you get to a situation like Daisy's done, where you're not putting anything or very little, for example, in your garden waste bin, that's great. You're saving a huge amount of transport costs, and you're doing something that's really good in your garden, for the wildlife and for the environment in your garden.
Excellent. So what have you been doing with the compost bin? And Andy's getting very excited. You know,
I know.
This is about as excited as Andy is, but he is excited, I can tell.
So it's quite easy, really. You just need a balance of what is essentially green items that aren't all green, and brown items that aren't all brown, which isn't very helpful. But essentially, Ben and I cleared out our whole green bin at the start of lockdown when our compost bin arrived, and most of the things that went in that bin went into the composter. In fact, I think pretty much everything did, apart from some horrible weeds that we sort of didn't want to be kind of put back into the ground when we use it for mulch. And on top of that, you kind of balance the kind of green items, so your grass cuttings, your hedge trimmings, all that stuff, with brown items. And the main thing I use for that is cardboard. So I get a lot of deliveries, get a lot of deliveries, so Amazon deliveries or kind of my flower delivery subscription service. All of those cardboard items go into the bin and they're ripped up and make them nice and small so that they break down quicker. And it essentially works really well. And then over a couple of weeks, it starts to kind of condense down. So there is always more room to put more in. It's great.
Fantastic. Excellent. And Andy, how do we get, for residents that are sat at home watching saying, I pay my 30, 35 quid a year, why should I? You're providing a service. Well, what's the sell? What's the, you've mentioned the sort of lorries chugging up and down. What's the killer, what's the thing you want to get across? Come on, we need to do some persuasion here.
There probably isn't one killer thing. I mean, a common thing I talk about with people, obviously, the fact that it costs us more than £30, £35 to actually provide the service. So people who don't have gardens are effectively subsidising it. And that, a bit like the housing conversation we've had earlier, doesn't make a lot of sense if you look at it if those people are in smaller houses and flats. Daisy's also kind of a good example of Daisy's in a slightly newer build house, not a huge garden. I've got lucky to have a reasonably large garden, and we're both very able to do composting. So whatever the size of garden is, you've definitely got room to do something in there. Compost heaps are fantastic for invertebrates and all sorts of other life that's much unloved but really, really essential around the world. So one of the things I really encourage people to have them is it gives room for all those beasties and beetles and other things you don't look for that wildlife needs, that things like hedgehogs absolutely love and need as a food source. And you're also avoiding those transport emissions, and you're also getting a warm, fuzzy feeling about doing something good for the world.
The other thing is, if you are a keen gardener and every spring or autumn you buy a load of manure and mulch to kind of mulch your borders, you are essentially creating your own. So it'll save you money in the long run, whichever way you look at it, which I think is a really good thing. And there's something very circular about it, isn't there? That what you're kind of getting rid of kind of comes back around and is really good for the environment too.
Absolutely. Daisy, we sort of just about qualify as young people still, I would suggest. Andy, not so sure, sorry.
Yeah.
But people sort of our age will go, oh, well, you know, I don't have time, I'm working full time, you know, some might have kids, you know, starting careers, etc.
Yeah.
How do you fit it in? Because I know you work really hard and you're really busy. How do you fit it in? Clearly, lockdown has been has been a help. But
I think that you can have a million excuses for a million things, but I think you just got to get on and do it. I think if you were mowing your lawn, you would put the clippings probably into the bin. It's the same amount of energy and time that you are using as a human being to just put it somewhere else so that it can break down. So there are no excuses. It's really good for the planet. It's really good for the kind of longer term health of everything. So you should definitely do it. And I think from a young people's kind of perspective, I don't know, it's education. We should be educating our children and on doing these sorts of things, and it shouldn't, I don't think in some cases, you know, having a green bin maybe shouldn't be an option. You should have to find a way to compost, I think.
Controversial. I know that, and actually on that point, Andy, we are, yeah, lots of councils do provide a garden waste service, but there are plenty that don't, aren't there? And,
there are a lot that don't. I mean, one of the common complaints, obviously, fortnightly, that's terrible, I can't cope with fortnightly. To the best of my knowledge, Milton Keynes is the only council left in the country that does a weekly garden waste service, and that's because it's still mixed in with food waste. And that's because it's a thing where literally all that driving, double everything if you do it weekly. It's as simple as that. That's a lot of driving around doing. So I think picking up on kind of Daisy's point, we've forgotten that this is how a lot of things used to be. So before 2008, there was no weekly garden waste service. The council only started doing that when food waste started being collected. And before 2002, there was no garden waste service at all. It didn't exist in any form, almost nowhere in the country. Everyone cottoned on to the fact it was a quick way of making your recycling figures look better, and all of a sudden it sprouted across the whole of the country, mostly as things like landfill taxes started to go up. And it was very expensive if you're a council, if people were putting garden clippings in the bin and you were putting them in landfill. Makes no sense when you think about it, particularly from a modern perspective. So all of those kinds of things have changed over time. So part of it is remembering, actually we've done it like this before and it worked well.
Absolutely. No, I totally get that. Fine, okay, we're going to, Andy, we're going to stick with you. Daisy, thank you so much for coming on and do hang around. Andy, we're going to have bin update now. We only do the bin update to play that jingle, to be honest, and yeah, everyone just sits around sort of smirking and looking slightly awkward behind the camera. But anyway, Andy, come on, give us an update. What's happening? Waste service, are things back to normal?
Alas, I can't hear the jingle from where I'm sitting in the studio anyway, so no, things are definitely not back to normal. So one of the oddities, obviously, and we talked about this before, has been that when we went into lockdown, the volumes of everything went skyrocketing, and to be honest, pretty much they've stayed up there. Probably a lot of that's to do with things like food. We're still generally eating from home, and if we're getting food, it's going to be takeaways. We're doing more gardening, and people are doing a lot more online shopping. So one of the really lovely things that Daisy was talking about, for example, was using that cardboard as part of the composting. That's good for us because cardboarding is one of the things that's been a problem. There's a lot more of it than normal, and there's only so much room to get it onto the lorries. So a few significant things have happened at the minute. We're still looking at anywhere between 10 and 20% more of everything than we would normally have. And as I talked about before, that varies a little bit from place to place in the Cotswolds. Some of you are more glass bottle people, some of you are more can people. And as the weather ebbs and flows, you can see the volumes of glass bottles, wine, beer, etc., going up and down. What we've gradually been finding recently is that we're starting to work out what our new normal looks like. That's meant, for example, that last Wednesday, we started to, on a regular basis, put out more recycling lorries than we've had before. I think one of the things that's somewhat confusing for people is when you see a lorry driving past, you think, well, that's my lorry, well, that's the lorry. So, for example, today there would probably be about 37 different vehicles with crews out doing the waste service, wherever they are in the Cotswolds. And for things like recycling, we would normally have had 14 lorries out. What we found with the amount of material we're picking up at the minute is we're needing more. So we've flipped over now to 16 or 17 lorries. Some of you will have seen a couple of changes last week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and they're continuing on now. And that's mostly so that we can try and deal with the extra amounts of paper and cardboard we're getting in particular. And what we're hoping now is that far fewer of you will see the instances where we're not picking up your bin on the normal day and we're having to come back for it afterwards. And we've needed to do that so we can do kind of a woods for the trees exercise and see where we're doing those little misses. So you're in a fairly rural location and we're not always picking up your bin. Sometimes that's get hidden because maybe we haven't done the whole village, for example. So that was a big important change for us in the last week, so we can try and get on top of the amount of material we need to collect. What that hopefully means is I'm thinking about 48, for example, properties we've got in the district where we have been missing the waste regularly. And so now it's about getting on top of those, and I apologise if you're one of those people, and making sure we're picking up that waste all the time, every time that we're supposed to.
OK, Andy, thank you. A few questions then, and what we're going to do, Lisa, I've got a few questions for you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you to sort of make your way up here. Have you still got your mic on? Excellent. Lisa's going to put her mic on and we'll sort of get her to sort of come up here, and it'll be a very cobbled together arrangement, but we'll hear some, we'll do a couple of questions for Andy first. Andy, first question. Big fan of home composting, says Amanda. Saves me money, but rewarding to know that I'm being kind to the environment. Can you make it a planning condition to have a compost bin alongside water butts? Actually, let's broaden that question out. Obviously, Daisy, you've recently purchased a compost bin. Subsidised, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you went online and...
I did.
Was it the County Council website?
Yep. I believe it is, yes.
Fantastic. So
it's not the easiest to find, but bear with it. If you follow the trail, you'll get there in the end. Fantastic.
So yeah, it's gloucestershire.gov.uk. But mind you, if you Google home composting Gloucestershire, that'll probably find you. Andy, you might know. Is there an easier way of finding it?
Yeah, there's Cotswold Recycles and there's Gloucestershire Recycles, and definitely if you go onto our waste pages, you can follow through the various links from there. Yeah. But definitely any kind of combination of Cotswolds, Gloucestershire, compost bins, you're going to end up with the right place.
Fantastic. We've got lots of questions about housing, actually, which is nice. Makes a change from waste, it has to be said.
Well, I think actually answering Amanda's question, because maybe we didn't quite answer that one, actually. I'd love to be able to do that, actually. Definitely in terms of water butts and compost heaps. And I think last year I asked about some bin placements at a planning committee. To the best of my knowledge, nobody had ever asked anything about bins at a planning meeting, for example. So that's the kind of thing we need to look at. Again, coming back to Daisy's point, making all of these things easier to do where you are, a bit more of a circular, better use of reuse and recycle, and making it easy to do that by default for people. So that's definitely something we can talk about and have a look at doing.
Fantastic. Sarah says, when will I ever get a green bin? Been waiting weeks. I think without knowing who Sarah exactly is, that might be a little bit hard to answer, but if people are waiting for a green bin, I know there's a waiting list.
Yeah, so Sarah, sorry, again, don't know where you are and don't know the particular circumstances for that. The customer services team are really, really busy dealing with everything that's garden related recently. We will get on top of that. Key thing at the minute for us, though, is that whenever we need to do a new job, it needs to not be at the expense of what we're already doing, because as described, we're really, really busy and everybody is working. The Ubico team, the staff, the vehicles are all running off their feet all of the time. There's no vehicles lying around doing nothing at all. Everything's busy. So for things like getting the bins out to people, we'll pick a time where we feel we're on top of everything we're doing, and then we'll start to get those bins out. Might be a little later than you like. Good opportunity potentially for doing more home composting, but what we will do is we'll get them to people as soon as we can, but not at the expense of making any other part of the service fall apart. That's what we're very keen to avoid doing at the minute.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, Sarah, get a compost bin.
Get a compost bin, there you go. Thank you,
No
Daisy.
excuse.
Sound advice. Right, what we're going to... and fantastic. Our fantastic comms officer, Ollie, has just put a post out with a link to Recycle for Gloucestershire, where you can get a compost bin. There's also a phone number there, so good news. Right, high production value here. What I'm going to ask is if Daisy and Lisa can swap, obviously socially distancing. I've got my big blue roll here, so I'm just going to wipe down the chair very quickly. Daisy, thank you so much
Thanks
for
having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And as you can see, it's live. Anything can happen. Thank you, Daisy. If you go sit yourself at the back, Lisa, I will wipe down this this chair for you.
Thank
and
you.
can come
Thank
up.
you, Joe. It's great to see that you will do anything.
I will do anything.
Leader of the council and also
Leader of the council. Yeah, nothing. There's no task.
COVID cleaner.
Too much. There you go. Don't worry. Nice and COVID cleaner. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
in case you wondered why there was a blue roll sat on my thing, I just forgot to take it off during the break. Right. Sorry about that.
I smell
As I said,
as well.
we're live. Anything can happen. High production values. Right. Okay, Lisa. We have got quite a few questions about housing actually. So where's the first one? So this is from Rob. Hi Joe, myself and my girlfriend unfortunately weren't successful in purchasing a first-time home using the government's First Home Scheme, 30% deducted market rate. Are there plans for more homes being built using this scheme rather than shared ownership?
Yes, in fact, this is something that we are looking at. What we want to do, and actually much in the way that Andy's just said, is what we don't want to be doing is going for that scheme as opposed to other things. So it's a balancing act always. But yes, we are looking into that and how that might work. There's recently been a consultation on that, which we responded to in depth, saying that this is definitely something that we would be interested in looking at into the Cotswolds.
Fantastic. Rob, you've got my details, so do pop me an email and I can pass you on to Lisa if you want to explore that more. Linda Hicks-Collett, loving the shorts. Thank you. And I've just realised, usually you can't see below my waist. So, yeah, apologies for that. I'm also not tucked in. I mean, this is terrible. Yeah, no. Well, I think we've all been there, haven't we, during lockdown?
Yes.
You know, we've sort of
He's just
got
got
the video
pyjamas.
conference and you can see above your
Pyjama
shoulders,
bottoms.
but that's it. Right. Simon on Facebook, Lisa, says, what about assisted living for vulnerable people in the North Cotswolds? We've got an elderly population. We need to make sure that we're producing a range of stock.
Yeah, that's right. And I have to say, I think in the North Cotswolds, we have seen actually a proliferation of assisted living.
Stow on the Wold in particular.
Stow in the Wold, good point in case, really. So I think you know, and certainly there are some other schemes still coming forward. The planning process works in that way, and we will be through the process of looking at local needs, etc. Make sure that we can cater for everyone. It's really important.
Great. A question here from Carol. Regarding housing, could housing groups not buy back ex-rental homes when they come up for sale? Bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I have to say that if you're meaning actual social housing owned by housing authorities, it's very, very, very rare that they sell stock, certainly here in the Cotswolds. What they are doing a lot of is regeneration. So that's what tends to happen. Unfortunately, we're not really seeing a market like that.
Yeah.
But good idea.
Katrina says maybe there should be more homes for young families rather than retirement villages. There are 3 in Stow.
Interesting. Yes, exactly. You know, as we just said, and yes, that is exactly what we want to do. We really want to be supporting young people, young families, so that we've got a really great balance across the Cotswolds. We don't want this just to be a district for older people. We will obviously cater for them, but I think it's that balancing act. But that's certainly an area that we want to look at.
Julie in Chipping Campden says, we're absolutely delighted we can open our pub on the 4th of July. Congratulations, Julie. I'm looking forward to going into a pub, quite frankly.
I think we all are.
Absolutely. Andy, I've got one for you from a sort of regular viewer, Rosemary Andrews. Rosemary, shout out to you, and of course Stephen. Can anyone explain what the rules are for recycling glass bottles? Should they also have their lids? And are the goo containers? You know, the dessert goo.
Yeah.
you know what
yeah.
God, I sound so middle class now, don't I?
Get those in Waitrose.
Are these considered glass? They're definitely glass.
Oh, you know what? I don't know. I don't think I've ever had one of those. So insufficiently middle class. So, the simple answer usually is that anything that's a mix of materials is an absolute nightmare from a recycling point of view. So if you're going to buy anything, buy something that's clearly made of one thing. So whether that's one type of plastic or something which is just glass. If it's a glass bottle, jam jar type stuff, the lid going in with that is fine because they'll be extracted. But obviously, ideally, you could just chuck the lid into your big white bag because that's normally where your cans and things like that are going to be going. Yeah. And that's the same type of metalwork.
Ollie, our comms officer, you were sort of waving at me a minute ago, Ollie. What were you saying? Goos are glass, so you can put it in your get this right, in the black box.
Yep.
And pass the test. Fantastic. This is from Mark. A couple of questions about cardboard sacks. So one from Councillor Sarah Orr, one of our town councillors here in Cirencester. Sarah, good to have you watching. Can we get a second blue bag for cardboard? One just isn't enough. And I think particularly with people having a lot more deliveries, this is a question that I've had a few times. Andy, your thoughts on that?
This is problematic. We've already had to change all 14 of the new lorries to bump up how much they squash the cardboard by about 20%, so we can get 20% more on. And that was in part because it was so dry, and cardboard doesn't squash when it's dry, you discover. Simple answer is if we just keep adding cardboard, we're just encouraging people to buy more and more cardboard. There are simple little tricks you can do, for example, like certain well-known online retailers will let you tick a box so that you can bring your deliveries into fewer containers. And that, for example, would reduce the amount of paper they're using for packing and the amount of cardboard. Don't forget, something we talked about a lot last year as we were rolling into the new service and before everything COVID-related happened, was reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle's at the end of that. Reduce is at the beginning of that. If we just gave everybody 2 cardboard bags and say, there you go, free for all, we would literally need 50% more lorries to be able to get that cardboard on. So it's difficult because there's a finite amount of space and there's a finite cost we can actually run that service for. Personally, we almost never fill our cardboard container. If you pack it flat, you can get much more in than you give credit for, but it is tricky and it's not as convenient and it does take more effort to do. And I acknowledge that, there's no point hiding away from it, but that's what we'd really like you to do. It's better for the service, it's better for the environment.
Great, thanks Andy. A question here from Denise Ebsworth. Please could you start cutting verges and trees? It's so dangerous around our villages. And that's from Denise. I think she's in East Leach. Denise, a really, really good point. So I live in Cirencester, and dual carriageway in particular is terribly overgrown at the minute, and actually causing a bit of a safety concern when you get to junctions. Gloucestershire County Council are responsible for verges and roads, but it's certainly something I will raise with them. Funny you mention that. We're starting a piece of work at the District Council around civic pride. So this is everything from having clean and tidy roads to nice verges, wildflower we're looking at. So that's a piece of work that we're looking into, and clearly we'll have to work with the County Council on that and even town and parish councils, but that's something we're starting to get underway. So I'd love to hear any ideas that residents have on that. Right, we're going to have to sort of wrap it up in a second. Hello to Kim. Kim is watching in Scotland. So one of you, maybe a relative, Lisa. So there we go. And Carol mentioned on that question about ex-council, she said, sorry if you misunderstood my question. She meant homes that were former council houses, so that had subsequently been bought. But I don't think we need to. To go into that. Final question then for you, Marco. Again, it's related to the cardboard sacks. As the sacks themselves, when disposed, go to landfill, surely this is not a sustainable approach? Probably not a lot we can do on that.
Actually, in Gloucestershire, nothing goes to landfill anymore, or almost nothing, because landfill is so expensive. It costs about £120 a tonne to put stuff in landfill. So all of that stuff will end up going to the Javelin Park Energy from Waste plant, which is a complicated incinerator, But the lifetime on those bags is quite long. A lot of our white plastic bags that are out are more than 10 years old, which causes a bit tricky because, as I said before, some of the instructions on them are out of date. So they do last longer than you think they last. They most definitely, however, do not go to landfill. The trouble with bags like that is they tend to be plastic which has already been recycled. That is really hard to recycle because it's been through the process already and it's broken down to a fairly kind of basic fibre by that point. So we do what we can with them, but to be clear, they don't go to landfill.
Fantastic. That's just about all we've got time for. Just a couple of things before we go. Residents in the Cotswolds, as I mentioned at the beginning, have been absolutely brilliant in containing the spread of COVID-19 and getting us to a point where we can begin to reopen. But as we continue, as things start to open and we sort of get the opportunity to be a bit more liberal with what we do, it is still incredibly important that you play your part in ensuring that the virus doesn't spread. So following public health advice, washing your hands regularly with soap for at least, is it 20 or 30 seconds? It's 20 seconds, isn't it? Making sure you continue to do that. Equally, if you're using public transport, please, you must wear a face mask, or if you don't have a face mask, a covering, you can pop a scarf over your face, but just make sure that your mouth and nose are covered. That is absolutely key. We've also got fantastic groups up and down the Cotswolds who are making face masks. I've got on my notes here, I've got the Cheltenham and Cirencester Scrubbers. Which doesn't, on the face of it, doesn't sound that flattering, but they're doing a fantastic job, and they've made over 900 masks for local key workers, and I'm told the scrubbers can be found on Facebook, so I'll ask our Facebook page to put a link to that. But the key thing is, face masks are not a replacement for social distancing and regular hand washing, so please follow the rules. We've all done so well. It's been so difficult, and you know, we've all been in this together. We really have. I know that's sort of been a phrase that's been used and over again over the last 10 years or so, but really we are all in this together. It is incumbent on all of us to do our part to ensure that the virus doesn't spread. On behalf of everybody here today, thank you to Andy, thank you to Lisa, thank you to Daisy, and thank you to Maureen for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Get your questions in. In the meantime, stay safe, stay apart. I hope you enjoyed today's show. To support our programme and all the other fantastic programmes and content that the Barn Theatre produce, please consider making a donation by clicking the link below.